Hi there, and welcome along to Classeek 15, our coffee break conversations with classical music insiders, giving you top classical career advice, hopefully. My name's Jack Pepper, I'm a composer, radio presenter and author, and today we are sitting down with the violinist and podcaster Asaf Maoz. He's played at the Verbier Festival in Switzerland, at the Jerusalem International Chamber Music Festival, and was a member of the Berlin-based Capital Dance Orchestra, focusing on swing music. Now, he's travelled widely, having been born in Israel. He lived in Germany for nearly a decade. There, he was assistant concertmaster of the Comic Opera Berlin and concertmaster of the German Chamber Orchestra of Berlin, not to mention concertmaster of the Verbier Festival Chamber Orchestra too. For 12 years, he was also a member of the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra under Daniel Barenboim, and since 2013, he has been a member of the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. When he's not playing, though, he has his own podcast. It's called Strings Attached, and there he interviews star musicians to discuss their career paths and the lessons they've learned. Among his many great guests, Andras Schiff and Zubin Mehta. Well, it's time for us to have a conversation now, talking all things dreams and creating your own path. I started by asking Asaf how he would describe himself as a musician.
To put it in a way that I like to speak to other young musicians is that I find that we are so stuck in a path that was dictated to us during our lifetime as musicians. You know, I will talk about myself. I grew up, I had to go to the conservatory, and then I went to the university, and then I went to study abroad. I got this fabulous job with the Israel Philharmonic, and everything was kind of expected of me. And I was supposed to follow this path. And at some point during this path, I realized I'm doing exactly like everybody expected me of doing. And at the same time, I was not being creative whatsoever. I was reporting the music fabulously, and I was enjoying every moment of it, but there was no part of the Asafness that was coming out. And that's where I decided to change a bit the way I think, and maybe, as you said, start dreaming a bit. And in a way, my life really changed, and it's not a cliche. My life really changed.
That's so interesting. You say that sort of for a long time following the path that was sort of made for you or expected of you. What do you think that is? Can you sort of describe that common path, if you like, that you tried to break away from?
So the common path, I play the violin. So the common path for a non-unique maybe violinist, I don't think I'm a soloist, but unless you aim to become the best soloist in the world, which is probably 0.001% of the violinists in the world, you are to become either a violin teacher or an orchestra musician. I mean, generally. And so I follow this path, and I loved it because I love playing in the orchestra, and I love playing chamber music. And I was very lucky and fortunate to get a job in the Israel Philharmonic. So everything I did was right, you know. I played by the rules. I took many auditions before getting this one that laid me this job. And yet, nobody ever told me that having an orchestral job doesn't mean that you're making music necessarily, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be happy. It means that you have a job. And then it took me some time to realize that I'm very fortunate to earn nice salary doing the thing I love the most, but it's not enough for me. So I practiced all my life, and then I'm not satisfied. And then I had to ask myself, why am I lacking this satisfaction? What's missing in my life that has to be changed? You know, it cannot be only that. I have the job, and now what?
Is this something that you were aware of starting out, and even as a student? Was it something that you came to realize later then?
Much later. You know, I always tell young students, I tell them, I was sure that by the age of 17, I'm going to be a huge soloist. And I didn't make it by 17, so I gave myself another chance by 23. And then I didn't make it, so I thought, okay, 30 is the limit, and then I'm going to be the biggest soloist in the world. It never happened. And so at that point, I realized playing in an orchestra is fantastic. But, you know, nobody ever told me that playing in an orchestra is like a factory. You produce a lot of music. And we are in the Israel Philharmonic, we're playing about 200 to 300 pieces a year, and another 300 to 400 songs a year when we play pops concerts. So basically, I'm playing about 600 pieces a year, And I'm producing music, basically. But there's no part of me that knew that this is what I'm going to do. To be, I'm doing it, I'm on purpose doing air quotes, a worker in the factory of music. And I think that somebody should have told me that before. Not that I wouldn't pursue this way, but I might dream bigger earlier.
I'm interested to explore the fact that you've grown up and studied in very different places as well, born and studied in Israel, but also studied in Germany. Was there a big difference between the two in the way music was taught and viewed?
Well, first of all, it's a great question because Israel is a tiny country that produced I don't know how many fantastic talents in music and different fields, but in music. So Israel was a fantastic hub to start my path, but it's tiny. So the competition and the challenges are very little, but moreover, the inspiration is very little. So going to Germany, and in the beginning I lived in Berlin and then I studied in Rostock, which is up north. I went every single day to listen to a concert of the best orchestras in the world. For me, my first 6 months in Berlin were the best school I ever had. I went to listen to rehearsals of the Berlin Philharmonic, rehearsals of the Staatskapelle Berlin. I was just sitting there thinking to myself, I want to be with these guys on stage. And I realized at that point, I'm totally not good enough and not ready to sit with these guys. And it was such a kick in the bum to say, okay, let's start practicing. Let's start doing the actual work and not just, I wish one day I would play with these guys. No, I actually had to put a lot of work in to get there.
And were there any mistakes, if you could be so honest to say, mistakes that you made in those early years in Germany? You've touched on the sort of misunderstandings you had maybe coming to Germany and thinking, I'll be a soloist, I'll be this, I'll be that, and then you see the Berlin Philharmonic perform. But were there any mistakes as a young musician and music student abroad, settling into a new country, a new culture, mistakes that maybe somebody listening could learn from if they too were going to study in a new country?
I think my biggest mistake was that I was very successful in Israel. I was very successful. I was playing in the best venues and I was playing with the best ensembles. And I landed in Germany and I thought that my phone is going to ring every second and everybody's going to call me and tell me, hey, Asaf, you want to come and play with us? Nobody knew who I was. And I was waiting for this phone call for a very long time until I realized nobody actually knows who I am. And I had to actually start practicing to become this person like I was in my big pond in Israel. And then if I can give an advice, I would say at some point, people started to realize that I'm quite okay playing the violin. And they would call me. And then I will always say to other people around me, if you're looking for a really good violinist, call me. I would never say if you're looking for a violinist. And it's not because I'm so cocky. It's because I realized you have to be above average. Because in Berlin alone, there are thousands of really nice violinists. Very few are really good. So I would always say, call me when you're looking for a very good violinist. And at some point, they kept calling. And I don't want to say I was successful, but I was very fortunate to play with the best ensembles in town, for a very long time.
How does an ensemble change you then? When you start playing with these groups and you start gaining ground, what did that practical experience of playing with some of these figures and, over the years, I mean, the Verbier Festival Chamber Orchestra, for example, or West-Eastern Divan Orchestra, you're playing with a melting pot of an ensemble there, people from so many different countries and backgrounds. How do those ensembles change you? How do they shape you?
Well, first of all, both ensembles that you just named are led by the two musicians that I find that are my musical idols. So this changed my life, but I will touch that in a second. I was very lucky to play with some musicians that are so talented and gifted that I would aspire to sit next to them and hear their sound and try to not imitate, but absorb as much as I can in order to, hey, I can do that. I'll do it a bit differently, but I'll do it as good as you can do it. And maybe I will. So this kind of ping pong of ideas. But you touched on these two orchestras. And, I was lucky to play in the Divan Orchestra for 15 years under Daniel Barenboim, which is probably the person who taught me the most about playing in an orchestra and how to think mathematically almost about every single phrase. At the same time, Gábor Takács, who's the chief conductor of the Verdi Chamber Orchestra, which is probably the opposite way. He's the most natural, instinctive musician I've ever met. And I make, even my family knows that I have to make it once a year to play with him till this day. So I get inspiration because somebody like him inspires me for a whole year. I get this full of energy and make music to the last bite that you can, because this is why we live for. We live to bring this music to our audience.
Are there specific sort of phrases, even something as specific as like a sentence that they would use that you remember to this day?
Oh, good question. With Gábor, we just usually make fun of him because he's so funny. And I know he was on your podcast and he has the most broken English, but it's so funny because the thing that I love the most is when he says, instead of, he wouldn't say, I have goosebumps. He would say, this gave me the goosebimple. And such, or he would say, you should play this phrase like a squirrel after 5 espressos. So, stuff like that. But in a way that he's working with us for so many years that everybody knows exactly what he means. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that stuck with me from him is he says, that when it says in the music, it says dolce, it doesn't mean only sweet. He calls it its inner delight. So you have to bring the sweetness, this beauty of sound from inside. And this is the thing I love the most about what he says. He told us once, you guys sound very professional. You sound as if you're writing an email. But I love to get handwritten letters. And, sometimes it's a good reminder to remember that being together is not the goal. It's something nice to have, but the idea is to make music together.
That's beautiful imagery there.
Yeah.
Do you find, because I'm imagining you must find a lot of these lessons as well, not just as a player, but doing what I'm doing, as a podcaster with your own podcast series, Strings Attached. You've had some incredible guests on there. Why did you want to create that podcast? What was the aim when you started?
Well, I did start with a different podcast. I have this podcast called It's Classical, but it's in Hebrew. I have already over 60 or 70 episodes. And at some point, my friends from the States, they told me, we see your post all the time about your fantastic guests, and we want to hear you create content in English. So I created Strings Attached. And I find that I can bring this my love for music, to other people. And if by any chance I can get them closer to this wonderful world of music, then I've done my work, let's say. And in the past few episodes which I uploaded, I actually took a different path, and I hosted only women, trying to to find different female role models. I found that there are very little number of musicians or feminine musical role models, which I find a shame, because we have fantastic musicians and they want to look up to someone and learn and dare to ask questions, and they can't always have this chance.
Which conversation has surprised you most? Of all your podcast guests and all the episodes, which ones led you in an unexpected direction?
In Hebrew, I had this podcast with a heart surgeon. I was originally planning to talk with him about the similar path between a musician that has to practice all their life and learn, and a doctor, an MD that has to learn. And I didn't know that he told me the sentence. Of course, it's obvious that, if I make a mistake, the audience notices. If he makes a mistake, somebody dies. But he said, I envy you because I touch physical hearts, but you touch people's hearts in a different way. And, I think this is our gift as musicians, is that if we're lucky, we make people feel something, even for a split second, but they can feel something. And I learned it from a person who implants artificial hearts to other people's bodies. So, there's a lot to learn.
And so how does that relate to a young emerging musician when there are so many pressures as well, the pressure of this competition, or financially as well, trying to make ends meet when you're starting out in your career? What would be your golden nugget of wisdom, if you like, your top tip to a young artist, a young music student, in reaching that sense of joy and having these ideas and having that sense of possibility? How could somebody starting out really get that sense early and quickly?
I think that many times we are programmed not to think, especially as classical musicians. You're supposed to follow the Bible, the music, and don't move and don't change any note. Maybe start by improvising a bit. Maybe start by writing a song, a piece, a painting. I have no idea. I'm not telling you what to do. I've never told anyone what to do. But I think that if you dare to think for 1 second, okay, I'm Jack, and I could be good at, I don't know, taking cats and teach them how to dance. And then you create your new show of dancing cats on whatever. And then, it might work. It might fail, but who cares? You tried. At least you're doing something that was not told or enforced upon you by anyone else. It was your idea. And I find for myself that as time goes by, I'm afraid less and less. And I know for a fact that I will fail. But I know for a fact as well that if I have so many ideas, some of them will succeed and I would be so happy. So dare to move tiny bit outside of the box. Or as my wife usually say, freedom within the frame.
I like that very much. There's an Oscar Hammerstein, the lyricist, quote where he said, "We cling too much to the thought of failure and not enough to the thought of success." And the joy that you get, and those moments may be fewer in terms of the people that say yes versus no, but when you get them, my goodness, is the joy all the greater for it.
But if I might say one more thing, many things that didn't work out for me were because I did things alone. And it's very good, and that's good advice I got from some really smart people. Try to put yourself in touch, in contact with other creative people or people you trust, because then working as a team can be much easier and also very fruitful. Some people have fantastic ideas you never thought about, and they can solve many other problems that you don't have the time to solve. Or, maybe they have the answer to something you don't know. So stick to really, really good people around you.
Asaf Maoz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jack.
And thanks to you for joining us. If you enjoyed our conversation, there are plenty more on the usual podcast platforms. You can also head online to classeek.com. Every episode in our Classeek 15 series is available there, with chats covering everything from record labels to social media and even the brain and music. And if you want the latest updates, follow @Classeek Music on social media. Thanks for joining me, Jack Pepper, and hopefully we can do this again soon.